Welcome back to our exciting new series with the Google Cloud team, Passport to Containers. We are so pumped to be working on a 12-part series for you this year with some of the best and brightest over there on the Google team. My name is Savannah Peterson. You're watching theCUBE, and today I am joined by Gary and Spencer. Thank you both so much for coming to hang out.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for bringing me over to Boston.
Yeah,
this is a great little adventure for me, honestly.
We gave you the nice cold weather, it's good.
Yeah, you did. I know the t-shirt that I'm wearing from you guys isn't exactly thick enough for this particular Bostonian winter weather, but it is cool enough that I had to wear it, obviously. You two are part of the very successful pioneering team that's helping a lot of different companies and projects adopt containers. You get to see them across their container journey and probably their maturation through some of your tools and then on to GKE.
Of course.
For folks who are just beginning, because as we know, there's still a massive market opportunity in the containerized worlds. What's a container? Spencer, I'm going to start with you.
Oh boy. Okay. Okay. I think to explain something where we are now, it's easy to explain from the past. So traditionally in the past, we'd have things like large servers. Then it matured, started virtualizing those machines because no one has all the space to have one single server. And a couple folks at Google, Red Hat, and others said, what happens if we made something smaller, compact, and we could stuff thousands of these containers, mini servers, into a virtual environment? That's what a container is.
Perfect definition. Thank you, Spencer. All right, I'm going to keep coming to you as the dictionary source for this.
That works. Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah, here you go. Little baby servers. So Gary, what do people use containers for? What are some of the best use cases?
I think the most obvious use cases and where people started out was really on development, because imagine and I'll go to my old world of Java, for example, was a great one, but to Spencer's point on sort of containers, imagine you wanted to use Java. I don't even know what version of Java people are on now. I'm old, but Java 8, and someone wants to use Java 11, right? And maybe your servers don't have it on there, and you got to install this version or that version. You're like, oh, you can't use this version because our build only has this in it. But you start thinking about sort of containers from that development perspective. You can package up your entire app and all of its dependencies independent of the host operating system, right? So I think that's when sort of Docker. Containers have been around for a long time, but Docker popularized them by making them a lot easier to use. So I think it started out on the development side, and then on the sort of deployment side, obviously for anything like. The easiest one is stateless applications. You package up any web application, a web server, Nginx, a Go application. You just want to package it up, it's lightweight, and you want to run multiple of them, right, that can scale up and down. So I think those are the easiest use cases to start with, but obviously we have everything from running ML workloads today to stateful exactly. But if you want to get started, web servers, simple apps, API servers.
Yeah, so containers equivocally give people an agility and a future-proofing tact that isn't as, say, language dependent as that you're talking about there. So how does this translate for someone who's interacting with one of these companies? So let's say I was with someone who's not leveraging containers versus someone who is leveraging containers. What might that experience be like for the end customer? Is that going to be slower, potentially, more likely to fail?
That's fair. If you could articulate it pretty simply, for your own customers, ultimately, you should know the difference. For them, it's all going to be about agility. I want this new feature faster. I want this shiny widget. I want this new button. And the resiliency, too, is much higher. Because if a container goes down, you have 10, 100,000s, tens of thousands other applications where it can easily just say, no problem. I'm going to reroute you here. Your experience will be exactly the same. So ultimately, for users, it's much more easy to consume. Same thing for your end customers, whether you're shopping or things like that.
Yeah. When I think of containers, I like how you describe them as little mini packages. I think of them as Legos.
Yes.
It's kind of like you have different Lego blocks, and then depending on what you need to build that day or however you need to spin that up, you can modify that in a way that wasn't easier. Gary, talk to me about some of the tools. Google Kubernetes Engine, obviously popular, but that's not all that you all are offering. And there's different junctures across the adoption journey that people have. So let's say I am hearing from my team that we need to start scaling containers, or we know Kubernetes is obviously going to be our platform for the future here. How do you get people on-ramped and convince them to make the investment and allocate that budget?
Yeah, I think where we used to try is to try to show people where, especially like in the maybe for their sort of like newer or ad tech or whatever, to show them how they can really speed up all of their like sort of DevOps activities, et cetera, right? So I think if you can get people on a quick kind of like developer like environment, and of course we integrate with all the tools, but we've got the full life cycle, right, of everything like cloud build, where we can build containers. We've got Cloud Run Cloud Run is just our serverless, right, for quickly getting up and spinning. Because the first time somebody experiences it, like they're used to running like we won't use Java, Node, myapp.js, right, and it spins up on their laptop, HTTP localhost 8080. So you kind of want to be able to give people that kind of experience, but you don't want them to have like this latency or whatever. So if you can just say quick deploy, and we've got the full integrated suite, whether it be like cloud workstations to cloud build and deploy.
Yeah.
So you can have your app up and running in maybe 15, 20 seconds, right, as opposed to like maybe one, but and then instantaneous operate it. And I think people will start to see that there's this level of agility that they get in there, right? And then you can take them slowly to the next stage of, well, maybe this will be a little bit easier for production because I don't have to worry so much about like every scale capability, right? Because we can easily create more replicas of it, right? And other things like that. So I think that's kind of the kind of key journey. But that's where we try to get people who are especially maybe have older technology or whatever, like start with kind of where you're going, right?
Yeah.
Like your new stuff. I don't know that people use what's the word? I don't know the word I'm looking for, but yeah, I guess just your newer type stuff, right? Maybe
Well, I think anytime you're adopting
Yeah.
a new technology, I was talking about this a lot lately as we see agentic AI and a lot of different things happening. Across teams, there's a skill up, and sometimes there's a bit of a fatigue there where it's, why am I learning this new skill? Why do we have to change how it's always been done? Sometimes that's an obvious evolution, but I think in some cases, it's not always. So what are some of the conversations, or maybe I think about it as myths sometimes, that people have going into this process that you help guide them through? Spencer, I'll ask you.
Sure. I think rightly so, but at the same time, no, the complexity is there, right? It's
Number one thing that people say about
Yes,
this
it is.
in Kubernetes, it's all about decreasing that complexity. Yeah.
100%. So there is a wall of learning there, but the goal is, we try really hard at Google, is how do we make it as simple as possible, right? Let's just start out with a container, build it out there, and then make it step by step by step for how you do networking, do systems, you can do storage, each way along the process to say, these look like big walls, we promise you they're not. Just take 5 minutes and learn it. And so it's a common myth of complexity. It can be, but as long as you have the right steps to get there, that should go away. Same thing, is it actually resilient? As long as you follow the core principles of it, you'll be fine. Just deploying multiple zones and it'll stay up. And
I want to dig in there a little bit because, and I know from looking at a lot of different data, from having conversations with customers, the complexity is the biggest fear or challenge when it comes to Kubernetes. Obviously, y'all being Google, where Kubernetes came out of, you probably have a slightly different lens on that. But what's the advantage of someone coming to work with you on this journey versus coming to work with someone else beyond the obvious, this came out of Google? But like you were just talking about, how quickly does someone matriculate through all those steps usually? What's that like?
Depends on the customer, but say even if you're let's start from the bare metal, you're a computer science student or even someone trying to spin up a site, you know what it means. To Gary's point, Cloud Run. You just want to get started with something that's based on Kubernetes, go start there. Okay, now you not necessarily sure how you want to spin up a GK cluster. We have complete walkthroughs and guides, just follow the best practices built in using something like Autopilot. You don't need to worry about understanding how the networking works, the complex of the systems, complex of the storage. Like that is a lot of stuff to pick up. Just
well, and I think
run.
that's why people get overwhelmed, which is why we're kind of having this conversation. Is what I've heard from folks is, we want to go down this journey, but every time it just feels like a lot to learn and adopt and shift with legacy systems and other stuff. But you're making it sound easy, Spencer.
We try to.
Yeah, no.
Exactly. It should be.
Have you noticed, just out of curiosity, have you noticed any verticals or industries that seem to be getting on the train a little bit faster, getting on the Acela versus the slower train, if you will?
Take that.
Yeah, go for it, Gary.
I think there were a few, of traditional industries. I mean, obviously, all of the startup digital native types, right? the snaps of the world and all, who
I mean,
always going to
tech
put it.
adopts tech quickly,
right,
and we
yeah,
tend
but-
to talk to
but
technologists quickly. But I'm
I
curious
think
about
we've seen
across
a lot
because it's going to change.
I think
the
we've seen
entire
a lot
landscape.
in retail and e-commerce.
Okay, interesting.
Which makes sense because a lot of them obviously, which makes a lot of sense because they all have to deal with events like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, right? And so as like sort of move to cloud, happens, right? They move to cloud for this sort of capacity, right? And now they start to look and say, well, look, I can, how much infrastructure do you want to rebuild and build out, right? I mean, one thing about like Kubernetes per se that people miss is it's actually, I like to think of it as like yes, you can run containers on it and that's great and it's a container orchestrator, but it's also a fantastic orchestrator of compute. And this is where I think sometimes people...
That's a really good point, Gary, and I'm super glad you just said that.
Which is where people
going.
forget about this, right? Because then you got to come up and you can you don't want to apply data center principles to the cloud.
No.
Right, and so I think when people started to, they said, "Hey, we're going to rebuild our apps. We know that we know that certain parts of our app are going to scale, and retail just has that notion that they're going to have sales, flash sales, Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So them, and I think the other industry that may be more tech savvy or whatever, but has been like gaming, because again, imagine your Pokemon Go is our probably overused or famous example, but you can explain it to a kid. I think is our boss Bobby would say, right? Like, hey, what do you guys do? Well, when you run Pokemon Go, it runs on our stuff, and that's how they get 1 million users, right? And it helps them, get
that's
that
fun.
scale. So
I don't even think I knew that.
Yeah, so
It's just by talking to Bobby all the time. That's great.
Yeah,
oh, I love that.
I saw that in this thing. I was like, I know a good customer that we can sort of put in there. But yeah, I think retail has definitely been in there. We are seeing a move of so I'd say retail is probably the biggest one, but.
So this is interesting, and correct me if I'm going down a rabbit hole I shouldn't go down, by all means. But when thinking about, I love that retail example. I used to work for a 3D printing e-commerce marketplace and platform. When you have a lot of SKUs, when you have a lot of things, and you need to have agility within those, that it multiplies the many things that can go wrong, and particularly if it's for a short window of time or something like that. So it's like you can toggle things a lot faster and with more confidence equivocally as a result of that. That's pretty cool. I mean, it makes sense for Pokemon Go too, because it's all so real time. I mean, do containers help people and create experiences that are much more real time? Do they feel more real time? Yeah,
for sure. Just because of the fact that you can, I think the scaling, in that capability. Also the fact that I think people can break down some other applications, right? I mean, there was the buzzword of what decade are we in? But the last decade, micro,
Who's counting?
Gary?
Yeah,
I forget. There's a lot of them, right? There's a lot of
After
them.
a certain number, we just stop.
Exactly, and they're kind of the same. You just have to remember that actually is the same. But we had SOA, service-oriented architecture, then microservices architecture, right? Break down these sort of monoliths. So I think that when you look at that, those really help scale those pieces, right? Different components can come up. You can definitely have faster iterations on deployments, right? Like all this happens, how I have to build a VM image, right? And re-image a machine, right? And all those things were just process, right? And sometimes it was literally just build process, that could take forever, right? But now imagine you move to the ultimate where you don't, where you're using Go or something, right? If you can get to there, right? Those things compile in 5 seconds. They're or 10 seconds, right? Lightweight compiler, goes up in there and you're up and running and you have a new component. You could literally deploy it in, I don't know, as fast as you could write the code, basically, I would say.
Minutes.
Yeah.
If you're speedy, which is really cool. That is one of the fun things when you do talk to people who are starting to have that moment of wow when it comes to containers, and they realize, oh my God, I was able to do this, and I spun up this cluster, and now it's all happening, and then now I can go do this, and this is going to be great. Once you get over that, there's kind of that initial up curve of, oh, this is different, and then bam. Drop
straight down, you're like, oh, now I can iterate feature after feature versus having to set up each individual thing over time, which is just painful and slow.
You don't want to do that. That's kind of all the stuff we were talking about before we even started filming this segment, is when it's processed to death like that. Yeah. You don't get to have the same fun, nor can you be as responsive or innovative. I mean, it cramps that whole style. What is something that you wish people knew about containers, or even working with you guys, that they might not already know?
Gary, you want to take that one? And I'll
you can both answer. I'm going to make you both answer this one.
I'll answer it. It may not be a direct answer to that question, but I was thinking of something as you sort of said in there. I wish that we had spent So a lot of times I think, that people say, yeah, sure, there are some complexities and differences in how you have to think about things and not running from the data center to sort of Kubernetes. And maybe I should write a book on this. We were talking about books earlier.
Yes, let's go, Gary.
But
you heard it here first, folks.
It's like, how do you map like Kubernetes and containers to what people are doing today? Like when people who are on the VMs in this other world. I don't actually feel like they're two different worlds, but I think we make it out to be two different worlds.
Go on.
And I think that always makes it scary for people, right? Because then they're like, I don't like change, or we're speaking like one language over here, and they're like, but here's how I do it today. And if you can't like map terminology or map process or stuff, then people like, you're like, oh, well, that's what you did, but now you don't do that, right? Or here's how you would do this, or like, you're gonna like my compute orchestration is the same thing. All right, so you're gonna come up here. You want load balancing, so you're gonna build a bunch of VMs. You're gonna figure out how to scale those VMs horizontally. You're gonna build a build process. You're gonna put a load balancer in front of them. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do that. You're like, okay, but imagine now that you package your thing up, and pretty much we can containerize mostly anything except legacy COT stuff, right?
Yeah.
And now you're just gonna say, hey, I want this many replicas of it. I want to have a load balancer. Like you're orchestrating all of that, right? And we're handling, all of that for you. Like you want 3 zones. Here's where your node pools are, right? Or you could have built it all yourself. And I think if you start to like explain to people these like building block pieces, right, of like how what you would have traditionally done can map into this world, things would be. I think there'd be a better like mutual understanding, right? And maybe less like people might be less scared and less
less apprehensive.
Less apprehensive, right?
About the evolution of that. I think you just brought up an absolutely outstanding point, Gary, because I think it's that fear, and it's not like ignorance. It's just the education hasn't had the opportunity to happen in certain instances for people to understand. This isn't something, it's not all of a sudden speaking in Japanese and writing in characters and doing something completely different than you've been doing as a native English speaker. It's not. But it is a new way of thinking about how you build and deploy and what you're able to do. I'm so glad you brought that up. All right, Spencer, now that you've had time.
I stalled for you.
But that's a really great point. Yeah.
I think for me, I always go back to principles because that's kind of what builds foundations of everything. So something I really admire with like folks like Don, Tim, Kelsey, all working together to actually originate this. Kubernetes, the way I always try to articulate people is it's more about not just resiliency, but how do you get to where you are to where you want to be. The whole product is based on that one simple idea. You declare something, it creates it, and that's it. Like there's no other craziness about it, right? And so riffing off Gary's saying, if you have a way where you actually translate these terms so there's less blockers, less way people actually want to get entry to it, I think the floodgates open entirely, right? So
how do we do that?
We need Gary to write a book.
I think we're...
I mean, this conversation, I think, is starting that, though. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, because from my experience, I've been in the container world for about 6 years now, and so not quite as OG as some of you, but also not an amateur. And one of the things that I've noticed, to your exact point, is there's like this. It's like people kind of get up to the edge of the cliff, but they're not willing to jump off and know that their parachute's going to deploy, and it's going to be the most beautiful experience of their life if they're just willing to get there. And I mean, Kubernetes adoption, there's still like 80% of the market that's going to be ramping to scale. You're obviously very poised for that. So what do we do? What do you find in those conversations when you have these conversations with folks, Gary? I'll bring it back to you. How do you turn that dial for them and make them realize that this is actually going to make everything in their environment better?
Yeah, I think, the good news is we don't have as much trouble. My stupid quote of the week is, or the year is now, like, how there's an expression like, nobody ever got fired for choosing IBM.
Right.
I feel like now we're at least at the point where like you wouldn't get fired for choosing Kubernetes.
Correct.
Right? Which is kind of like the same thing like 20 years ago, you wouldn't get fired for choosing J2EE. Right? Those were kind of your sort of core platform. So I think that's the sort of good news there. And then I think it's, finding like really digging in and just sort of finding what that right kind of like, starting project or whatever is. I think the pressure that some people have now is like, and sometimes you have to say like, look, we're not going to do this right away, but you really should be on a path because sometimes people literally just have a lift and shift that they have to get done, right? like I'm not bad-mouthing anybody, but we know there's
No.
a certain place that has a licensing issue, right?
Yeah.
That's forcing people to say, I got to move from here to there. Maybe they don't have time to like, listen to my spiel about like how the mapping and that, but like as they're on that move, right, where, like, how do you future-proof? How do you start to think about where do you go sort of next, right? I think those are the main sort of conversations that we need to have. It's not I think it shouldn't be an and or conversation. Mm-hmm. It should be like an eventually conversation, right? Like here's where we're going and here's where you're going to sort of go. Inventory your apps, right? And I think we have a lot, we talk a lot about this stuff. We've done some of this stuff in like studies like Dora, and we talk about like app modernization. I just think sometimes we like to bifurcate things too much, right? And say like, you're either doing this or you're doing that, right? And you're right. And I think if you show that, look, there's a continuum, and you should start to get on that continuum. And some things may never come, and have a holistic conversation. And this may be a sales problem. I think it's a whole problem, right? But
I love it, though. You're right on it.
It's just like, I think that's how you sort of, get people there and help them sort of paint that picture. Consulting, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, it's consulting, but what you're talking about is education.
Yeah.
And right now, a lot of these teams are dealing with a couple evolutions, not just the container journey, but we're talking about AI. There's a foundational shift happening at the core infrastructure level, and when you're selecting your tech, your tools, your approach, your partners, we're talking about multi-million-dollar decisions, maybe even more, depending on the size and scope of the company, to where I think that's exactly, it's imperative. You got to write the book now, Gary, is basically what I'm saying. Long story short,
We believe in
long story short, I'll write mine about interviewing, you're writing one about this. Because I think that's the problem, is people don't talk across the fence sometimes. And even early in the Kubernetes days, it's like, Docker, Kubernetes, there's all these different things happening. Well, what's going to become the platform? I don't even feel like we really got to this ubiquitous decision with Kubernetes until about 18 months ago, where it really felt like at scale, everyone had agreed that this is the tool we're going to use and this is what's going to happen next.
Agreed, yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, which is kind of cool.
And ironically, we should, not that because we'll do enough sessions on AI, but not ironically, but I also think that the AI thing with Kubernetes is kind of interesting, right? And I think I may have said this the last time we talked or whatever, but I think it's interesting to say, like, if you need a new platform, obviously if you can use turnkey things, right? Like whatever, Vertex or, the other clouds have, their sort of, turnkey things. But if you want to have your own platform, you're already running apps on here, again, AI and running GPUs and all this stuff, scaling up, it's all about orchestrating compute. Right?
And I love it. That brings it right back to your original point that you started saying earlier. Kubernetes is good for compute. Everyone's obsessed with one part of compute right now, which is chip manufacturers in particular, which is lovely that we're having a nice nerdy moment for all of us in Silicon Land. But on the flip side, to your exact point, there's so many other things that go into optimizing how we process workloads and how we run things that, exactly, Kubernetes is a tool on that front as well.
And I think, I was going to say, I think sometimes, you could have run into this situation, I think, where like AI came. So there's been a few challengers, a few people who have tried to say, build the next Kubernetes or the next better thing, right? And we got to give full credit to the folks who originally created Kubernetes and this sort of extensible model to it, right? And I think the AI thing is a great, even stateful applications were a great example, right? How we extended it to do storage, right? And you're because what you end up finding is you're going to write some new thing, but you're still going to have to do all this other stuff. That stuff doesn't go away. So I think the fact that Kubernetes is extensible is well, look, you still needed to spin up the compute that runs the GPU, that does this. You still need to schedule something somewhere. Are you going to rewrite all of that and be as good as what Kubernetes had? Or what if we could just extend Kubernetes, right? So you looked at things and then maybe it didn't do as well for GPUs or other hardware. So there's things like DRA, dynamic resource allocation. Basically a way of adding non-CPU, we basically hard-coded CPUs and memory and GPUs in there, right? But now I would say I want to take about network and other types of hardware that's in there. We need a way to plug that in and consider that in the scheduling and orchestration of the compute. And so I think that became, we'll just extend Kubernetes to do this, right? And I think now all of a sudden you're you need an AI platform. It has become the platform. I just don't think there's not just because we work on it, I think that it's proven that it's the platform for at least everything we can think of right now.
I agree with you. For the record, and as someone who talks to a lot of different people, I really love the way I'm going to start saying that now. Moving forward, is everything we can think of right now, everything we're doing right now. It's a great hedge for when, for if anything, if anything happens. Do you agree, Spencer?
Like background?
Well, I mean, do you find that there's a educational on-ramp with folks for understanding it's not just one specific thing or just a platform, but that it really optimizes your entire endeavor?
It does. No, it doesn't. And what Gary's saying too, like education in a huge community, how do we get them move forward with everything they need to know, right? And benefit. They have all the various knobs you can use however you want. You have storage plugins, you have network plugins, GPUs, TPUs, everything we're building across the board. You can plug and play with any piece of technology you want. There's not many pieces of open source software out there where you can do that, where you say, I want to run Java, I want to run Go, I want to go build the next big AWS site, whatever it is, or the next big Google. All that is possible because of all the knobs you can interplay across the board. I can't think of many things where that's possible outside of maybe Linux. Like, that's just not a thing.
Well, that's another outstanding point, though, is that interoperability. You're not, by playing in this sandbox, you're not stuffing yourself in a silo. And I think that's actually one of the huge things that we're all seeing right now as these legacy systems come to a juncture where we're adopting exponentially more data, exponentially more processing, depending on what it is. We want, like we said, we won't go too far down the AI rabbit hole, but the point is we're all thinking about it right now. Yeah. And to be able to toggle and keep those favorite things that you liked, but also have the institutional structure. I mean, most open source endeavors aren't coming out of the nest of some of the smartest people in the world, like we're talking about here at Google. And that's one of the things that I've always found really interesting about the project itself is behind it, you have this incredible fucking partner who can really be your ally across the board when you're scaling or wherever you are in the journey. Where do most people find you in their journey? Are they just getting started? Have they already gone down the Kubernetes rabbit hole and they're realizing they need to ramp? Like what, yeah.
It's all spectrum. So funny thing is I have a customer earlier this week where same concept, they want to start with Kubernetes, great. Day one, let's set you on something easy like autopilot and you can just run and go and give you all the basic training, follow tutorials, no problem. Gary knows as well as I do, you have the opposite side of customer. It's like, I want you to build this KEP tomorrow. So like a Kubernetes enhancement proposal for adding something to the new Alpha API for the new open source community. So you have entirely different ranges where it's, I'm a day one person, or I trust you ought to go build this. Can you go build this cool thing for me? It's like, of course, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That I had a feeling it might be a spectrum. One of the things I want anyone listening to take away from this is you're not behind yet. You're not, we're beyond the early adoption, very iterative part, so we know these things work, but you haven't missed the boat. Everyone can still come on the boat, come learn, come get on the airplane with us and go on to this next journey. What do you think is going to happen next? And now this is just for a little bit of fun. Let's say, I always like to think about it a year from now. So beginning of 2026, how do you think this conversation will have evolved?
I think when we have two really clear ways, and you see that a lot with the release of 1.32.
Yeah.
We're doing fantastic things with stateful apps. So think of an e-commerce site. They have to store that data. It's becoming much more resilient, right? And that's fantastic.
Yeah. Flip
side, we all see the writing on the wall with everything's changing in the world of AI is here. And not to break the point too much with a shirt and everything's easy, but we know, right? But as the world develops more of this idea of a large language model, LLMs, right? The whole idea is going to be, we're doing training, but how do we bring this to more people? How do we bring this information to them with things like inferencing? So serving those LLMs, right? The ability to have the whole world have access to this huge plethora of information that companies have spent billions of dollars trying to train these models, right?
Oh yeah, inference is what makes AI real. Period, full stop.
Yeah.
It's not the GPU, it's not all of that. In terms of the experience, in terms of how humans are going to interact with it, it's all about the inference. Yeah.
Make it usable, make it tangible so anyone can consume it and have a question of what's the weather today.
So you think there'll be more ubiquity around this, that, we'll see a little more saturation in the market in a good way.
Yes, in a good way.
You guys leading it, I'm sure. What do you think, Gary, a year from now?
What I think and what I hope, I guess I'll say. So I hope
Yes, let's have both.
I think, well, I
Or
think,
hopefully the same.
I think, and I hope that they're the same. Yes, I think, but it might be hopeful. But I will take a little bit of an AI spin to it. But so I think a couple of things are happening. There's a lot of people still moving to the cloud. I do think that we'll see more. We'll see more adoption of sort of like Kubernetes. But where I think things can go, because Kubernetes is declarative. Right? Like in a way, yes, it uses, YAML, right? Yet another markup language, which in theory is human readable if you're a human who likes to read YAML. But you can but it literally it says,
Bless
right?
you.
But it literally it says like, deployment, right? Like replicas, right?
Yeah,
like it kind of has like, you kind of get the picture in there. But where am I going with this, right? Now imagine that you can just say, if we get smart enough with, and our infrastructure is already starting to, like even, at least on the Google side, right? We've got things like autopilot, we're even making like scaling of compute even easier with other technologies that we have, right? So you don't have to so much worry about it. You can kind of just tell us that I want to run this, right? And we'll figure out the right type of compute and we'll handle the scaling and the fast scaling. So now take it even further back. Why not just be able to like analyze your applications for you in AI, or even you can just kind of tell us, declare kind of prompt-wise or whatever, right? And then we can figure out and start to optimize over time. And I think that's where, I think people will start to see a lot of benefit. They can more easily get started. Just have your code, right? We already have things like build packs, right, that figure out what language to build the more optimal container for you, right? Now you say, hey, I want to deploy this and it needs blah, 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 right? YAML's just a back-end thing. So I think we can use Gen AI for the generative parts there. And then we're already starting to, we capture things like the metrics and what code you're running and do things like auto-scaling. We can start to, I don't think we'll get to full autonomic yet, but I think that we can start to get to the point where you can more quickly get your stuff up and running, and then we'll have tools that are built in there that are going to assess what you're actually running and tell you how to run it better.
Yeah.
And then in 2027, we come back and you're like, hey, these guys were pretty smart. What they were telling us, we're just going to not let AI take over the world, but we're going to start letting the AI, make some of these sort of scaling decisions for us. It, optimizes the side. So I think that we're on the cusp of that.
Yeah.
Which is like, if you think about it, that's close to like, what we had with like Borg internally in Google. So I think that's where it'll start to go, because I think once it's decided that that's the infrastructure, and that people like the API as being the Kubernetes API as being the portable standard thing, right? We never got a standard cloud API.
Yeah. So
Kubernetes API became that standard thing. So that's what you care, that your artifacts are portable. And now can we more easily like generate this stuff and then sort of monitor what's going on and make those sort of decisions. That's where I think like, and we are working on some of that stuff. And even in open source, there's a lot of work on that, a lot of tools that are out there, right? So that's where I think things will go. Like, you'll be able to just say, I want to do this, and we'll do it.
I think it's cool. One of the facts, I think this was at one of my first KubeCons that I heard this, is that developers only get to spend 27% of their time writing code on average, and that's 73% of time fixing, debugging, admin, whatever. There's so many other things. When I think about all of this, one of the things that's always made me really excited about containers is we're going to get some of that time back. And to your point, they'll be able to self-heal or deploy or to do things, or even using NLP to be able to command or declare what you want to build next, or have the system do is think about even if we had another 10% or 20% of that brain capacity to be creating or to be building or to making that Pokemon Go game even more fun, or whatever that might be, or customizing that retail experience for someone. The future's pretty bright.
It's going to be a good place. We'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, I always say, like, I guess when I was coming up, trying to come up with something clever for a sales presentation or whatever, right? I used to say, it's like, run workloads, not infrastructure, right? Mm-hmm. So now I think you can say, like, maybe even go further back, right? Yeah. Like, more build your workloads. Again, I think that's where people want to spend the time. Like, what is the value to your business, right? And I think that's where I think sometimes we like sometimes people oversell like cost and all the rest of this stuff, right? You kind of set a sense of like these metrics that maybe aren't always achievable right away. So then people are like, oh, I didn't achieve this. But you're like, no, you actually did achieve a lot. Yeah. You got more code written. You got more apps. Maybe your app scaled better, right? So that you were able
Yeah.
to handle like this event. There was less stuff. There's a lot of these benefits that I think sometimes they're valued, but they're hard to value in a cost basis, right? And I think everybody initially will try to boil everything down to, probably going way off tangent, but down
I'm
to
loving it,
cost,
Gary. Don't
down to
stop. I
cost,
know
as,
exactly what
down
you're
to
talking
cost is success.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not the real. Yes, that will be successful.
It's
but
a
that's-
factor.
It's a factor, but
It's
the
one
real
slice of the
success
pie,
is
not-
what was your, and I won't over, and productivity is a terrible term, but you just got more done. And more done that was important to your business, and the IT part or the compute, that's just to be the means to the end, right? And I think that's where, and that's what I always try to tell people about, like kind of like, Kubernetes or whatever it may be, right? Or wherever the next thing may be. Like, you shouldn't have to care. And yes, I get it that, like, yes, Gary's not idealistic. I know that there's some problems. Sometimes you got to go tweak this parameter and tweak that,
I mean,
right?
that's with anything,
but,
though.
But
yeah.
did you have to build your own custom kernel, your own VM, your own this, right? Are you stuck on, like, there's a whole bunch of other stuff
Yeah.
that you got out, right?
You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you want to do something
Exactly.
new, is what you're saying,
Exactly.
which I think is actually really critical. And as you're talking about this would actually be a fun thing to do together for one of these. Maybe we could visualize some of those benefits. We could work together on that, and because I think you're really onto something. Because when we talk about particularly tooling and platforms and software, we're always looking at spend and cost, and even a lot of the data we look at. How much are the C-suite going to spend on X, Y, or Z this year, and then that kind of determines some of our content sometimes. The reality is, it's not just that at all. Actually, that success is not just fiscal. There's so much more to even developer morale and their experience, right? If you're able to do more, you're feeling awesome rather than having to fix things or having to be repetitive in your actions or whatever that might be. It could also be, lower downtime or happier. Maybe your customer NPS goes up because
Right.
the whole experience on your site or with your product is better. It would be neat to map one of these out for even do like a little survey with some of your customers to understand all the different value adds, so that people can really look at that pie and say, wow, okay, yeah, I could save money here over the long term, and it is more agile. But beyond that, look at all this other stuff. Look at how this experience around technology has gotten better, and how much quicker, speed could even be. Time to deployment can be one of those metrics, or whatever that might be. Okay, so we have our work cut out for us for the next show.
Yeah.
It's all teed up. We'll be fine.
Do you have a note you can draw?
Okay, we'll talk about it after I close this segment, but I'm actually one of our, I've recently embraced the illustration side.
Excellent. I was setting you up.
I appreciate that, Gary. That's so nice. Yes, we'll have to draw for you all next time, folks. Spencer, Gary, thank you so much for coming to hang out today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Always fun.
Always fun and insightful. And I really hope that for all of you listening, wherever you might be, that you feel a little more confident in your ability to adopt or approach or scale up this technology, that you also understand you're not already behind. There are so many opportunities and applications for containers, for Kubernetes, for optimizing the platforms and the foundation for whatever it is you might be building right now. And obviously that Google is an outstanding partner with a ton of resources. We're going to keep these videos coming for you all of 2025, our Google Cloud Passport to Containers series. Very excited for that. My name's Savannah Peterson, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. You're watching theCUBE, the leading source for enterprise tech news.